Walter Grady never meant to be remembered. Born in the fog-drenched town of Hesper's Hollow, a place tucked between forgotten coastlines and ghost stories, he was a boy who listened more than he spoke, who observed cracks in the walls long before he dared to question what lay behind them. His father, a former clockmaker whose hands trembled from too many unfinished yesterdays, taught him that time was both a prison and a promise. His mother, a schoolteacher turned recluse after a fire no one talked about, filled their home with dust-covered books and silence. From them, Walter inherited precision and distance, skills that would later serve him far too well. He was ordinary in every visible way. His eyes, a dull blue, like water left standing too long. His posture, folded like a letter never sent. But Walter had a talent no one could name. He noticed what others ignored. The way shadows moved in locked rooms. The hum beneath the floorboards. The silence between a question and its answer. His journey began not with a call, but with a pattern, an odd rhythm in the disappearance of 7 children over the course of 7 years, each on the same day of the same month. No one else connected the dots. But Walter did. He didn't want to. He tried to forget, tried to make the puzzle pieces fit into a safer picture. But the truth had a gravity of its own. The night he decided to act, it rained harder than he had ever seen. Lightning carved open the sky, revealing brief, stuttering glimpses of the world's edges. He packed only what he could carry, a flashlight, a notebook, and a photograph of his sister, the 8th child who would have vanished had she not died in a car crash the year before. Her death wasn't part of the pattern, or so he thought. Walter left Hesper's Hollow with no map, guided only by fragments, half-whispered rumors, scribbled messages in forgotten archives, the name of a town erased from every modern chart. As he followed the trail, the world widened and darkened. He met people who didn't exist in any census, passed through towns that seemed to breathe. He learned that doors were not just architectural, but metaphysical, passages that opened only when one stopped looking for them. But knowledge was never free. The deeper Walter went, the more he paid, with sleep, with blood, with memories that began slipping through his fingers like mist. He began to dream in languages no one taught him. He began to remember things that hadn't happened yet. The line between hunter and hunted blurred. The disappearances weren't isolated incidents. They were offerings, part of an ancient transaction between worlds, and Walter had stepped into the role of debtor. Still, he pressed on. Not because he believed he could win, but because turning back would have meant admitting that he had already lost. In the ruins of a sunken church, he uncovered a device made of bone and brass, pulsing with the echoes of stolen voices. In the mouth of a cave that moved locations each night, he spoke with something wearing his father's face. And on the banks of a river that reflected memories instead of light, he faced the question he had feared since the beginning. What if his sister hadn't died in that crash? What if she had been taken? By then, Walter was no longer the boy who listened more than he spoke. He had become a man who knew that the truth isn't always the light, but sometimes the fire. And though he could not save all the lost, he could become something else entirely. A disruption in the pattern, a crack in the ritual, a whisper loud enough to wake the sleeping gods. He never meant to be remembered. But legends, like nightmares, are often born from those who least seek them. And so began the myth of Walter Grady. Not a hero, not a martyr, just a man who asked the wrong questions and walked far enough into the dark to demand answers. It was hunger that betrayed Walter Grady. Not the physical kind, though his ribs had grown familiar with the echo of emptiness, but the other kind, quieter and more dangerous, the hunger for proof. By the time he arrived in Elmridge, a gray town nested between salt flats and rumor, Walter had been on the road for weeks. He'd crossed landscapes that seemed allergic to maps. He'd bartered stories for shelter, traded old pain for warm water. His eyes had learned how to measure distance in trust, not miles. But in Elmridge, everything paused. The town didn't speak, it listened. It listened too closely. Walter came there following a thread, a single torn corner of a missing person flyer he'd found nailed to a tree on the edge of a vanished road. The name on the scrap matched one from his list. So he stayed, watched, listened, waited. But waiting has a price. It was near midnight, rain sifting through the air like quiet ash, when Walter broke into the back pantry of a baker's shop. He didn't think of it as theft, not really. He'd watched the owner toss the bread out each night, too stale to sell but too fresh to ignore. Hunger had made a poet of his justifications. He took 2 loaves, one for that night, one for the road. He was 2 blocks away when the constables caught him. No chase, no shouting, just 2 silent men who appeared as if drawn from the mist. Their uniforms looked like they hadn't changed in decades. Their voices didn't rise. Their eyes didn't blink. They took him to a cell that smelled like old iron and forgotten voices. The next morning, the town square transformed into a court. There was no building for justice in Elmridge. Justice came to you. The townsfolk gathered in quiet rows, eyes heavy with curiosity disguised as judgment. Walter stood before a wooden podium worn down by too many other names, too many other sins. The magistrate, an ageless woman with a voice like burnt paper, read the charge: theft of bread, trespassing, vagrancy. But it wasn't the crime that held weight in her voice. It was the fear beneath the words. This trial wasn't about the bread. It was about Walter himself. He realized, too late, that Elmridge knew things it shouldn't. Knew that he carried more than stolen food. Knew that he was not merely lost, but looking. And the town didn't like being looked at too closely. Walter didn't plead. He told the truth. He spoke of patterns, of disappearances, of the name on the torn flyer and the whispers behind locked doors. He spoke not to win, but to be heard. And that was his mistake. When he finished, the silence pressed down like a storm cloud. Then a laugh. Just one. From the back. Cut short. The magistrate leaned forward. You came for answers, she said, and found only bread. That was your salvation. But you chose to feed your mouth instead of your mind. He was sentenced not to prison but to stay. Until the pattern releases you, she said. Walter was given a room above the tailor shop. No locks. No bars. Just a ceiling that creaked with memory and a window that showed a street where no one passed. He was watched not by guards, but by time itself. Days blurred. Nights thickened. People stopped seeing him, even when they looked right at him. But even there, even trapped in plain sight, Walter listened. He found the girl from the flyer, no longer missing but hollow. She walked the streets with her eyes fixed to the ground, always muttering numbers in reverse. He followed her until she led him to the old reservoir, sealed off after a flood that never made the news. It was there, in the water-stained silence beneath the broken tower, that Walter understood. The trial wasn't a punishment. It was a test. The town had wanted to know what kind of hunger he served. Now it knew, and it feared the answer. Because Walter hadn't stolen bread. Not really. He had stolen attention. He had made the town look at itself. And in the hero's journey, even the smallest defiance, a crust of bread, a broken silence, can be the crossing of a threshold. Walter was no longer just a wanderer. He had become a disruption, a threat, a variable in a cycle that preferred repetition over resolution. They had let him stay to watch him fade. But Walter Grady was not fading. He was sharpening. And somewhere in the cracked hush of Elmridge, the next part of the pattern was already beginning to unfold. It began with a question. Walter had been in Elmridge for 12 days. Each day was a copy of the last, silent meals, unmoving townsfolk, routines that looped like clockwork caught in its own reflection. The room they had given him above the tailor's shop remained untouched by time. No dust gathered. No footsteps echoed above. And yet he was not alone. Elmridge had eyes that didn't blink and ears that didn't forget. He had stopped asking for answers. Instead, he asked questions. To the old woman on the bench who fed birds that never landed. To the boy who drew spirals in the dirt but never spoke. To the girl from the flyer who now whispered sequences of prime numbers under her breath. Each question left a ripple in the air, as if Elmridge itself flinched when confronted with curiosity. And then the summons came. No envelope. No messenger. Just a single word, scratched into the condensation on his window. Return. He knew where it meant. He dressed slowly, the weight of the town like wool over his shoulders. Outside, the streets stretched wider than before, as if reluctant to bring him back. Still, he walked. The square was empty, save for the magistrate. No audience this time. No formality. Just the judge in her black robes, standing beneath the withered tree in the center, her hands clasped as if she held something delicate and invisible. Walter approached, but did not speak. She studied him, eyes sunken but not tired, voice soft but not weak. The town says you have not slept. He didn't deny it. She nodded. That's wise. The dreams here tend to feed instead of reveal. Walter stepped closer. Why am I still here? Her smile was not unkind. Because you asked that question. He waited for more, but she turned from him, facing the empty square as if addressing the ghosts of old verdicts. Elmridge is older than the maps that deny it. We are the fracture line between forgetting and being forgotten. People come here when they begin to remember things the world once buried. Patterns, names, histories that pulse beneath the skin of the present. She looked back at him. But you, Mr. Grady, you didn't stumble here. You navigated. And that changes the nature of your offense. Walter took a step forward. What offense? Theft, she said. But not of bread. You stole narrative. He blinked. What does that mean? You refused your role, she said. This town depends on stories repeating themselves. People vanish, and others forget. You came to investigate a disappearance, and in doing so, made yourself the next chapter. You were meant to become part of the pattern, another silent shape in a quiet town. But you did not fold. You asked. You remembered. She stepped toward him, closer now than she had ever been. That's dangerous. Walter felt the air thicken. Not with threat, but something heavier. Expectation. I didn't come to rewrite anything, he said. I came because someone mattered. Someone was lost. The judge's expression flickered, as if a long-buried ache passed behind her eyes. You remind me, she said quietly, of someone I failed. Then, without warning, she removed the thin chain around her neck, revealing a small brass key, worn, ancient, inscribed with a symbol Walter had seen in the girl's drawings behind the tailor's shop. She pressed it into his palm. The reservoir is sealed, she said, but not to those who've been rewritten. Walter stared at the key. You're releasing me? He asked. No, she answered. I'm changing the story. And just like that, she walked away. No guards. No verdict. Just that key, and the silence that followed. Walter stood alone in the square, holding something that felt heavier than metal. In the hero's journey, there is a moment when the mentor reveals a deeper truth, one that transforms the quest from personal to cosmic. This was that moment. The judge was not just a gatekeeper of punishment. She was a former seeker, one who had once tried to undo the pattern and failed. But in Walter, she saw the possibility of a different outcome. She didn't free him. She entrusted him. The story of Elmridge had not ended, but it had, for the first time in years, turned a page. And Walter Grady, former drifter, reluctant thief, forgotten wanderer, was no longer surviving the tale. He was writing it. Walter Grady held the ancient key tightly in his palm as the weight of the town's silence pressed around him. The air in Elmridge had thickened with a strange tension, a quiet anticipation that seemed to ripple beneath the cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows. The key was a summons and a challenge, a call to venture deeper into the heart of the mystery that had ensnared the town for so long. No longer a mere wanderer, Walter stepped forward with a resolve sharpened by trial and curiosity, ready to pursue the truth behind the disappearances that had become the town's dark heartbeat. His first step was to confront the fragmented memories that haunted Elmridge. The townsfolk, once guarded and distant, now appeared as fractured mirrors reflecting pieces of a puzzle Walter was desperate to solve. He moved quietly among them, speaking in whispers, catching fleeting glances and half-spoken tales. Every story carried an undercurrent of fear and avoidance, yet within the fragments lay threads of a pattern, a network of secrets tangled like roots beneath the town's foundations. Walter sought out the girl from the flyer again, the one who muttered numbers and moved like a ghost tethered to forgotten places. This time, he approached with a gentleness born from shared exile. She hesitated, then led him beyond the surface of Elmridge, to the edges where the land cracked and gave way to wild overgrowth. There, hidden beneath tangled vines, was a rusted hatch partially buried in earth and shadow, the gateway to the reservoir the judge had mentioned. The key fit perfectly. The hatch creaked open to reveal a narrow stone staircase spiraling down into darkness. Each step echoed with a hollow chill as Walter descended, the air growing colder and heavier with the weight of forgotten things. His torch flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe as if alive. At the bottom, he found a vast chamber, damp and echoing, filled with relics and remnants of vanished lives, faded photographs, children's toys, a cracked diary with pages torn and stained. But it was the walls that drew his gaze, covered in cryptic symbols and drawings, an ancient language of grief and warning. Here, Walter realized, lay the true story of Elmridge's curse, inscribed not in words but in memory and sorrow. Days turned into nights as Walter pieced together the fragments. He cross-referenced the diary entries with the cryptic wall symbols and the whispered rumors from the townsfolk. Each discovery brought new questions, but also clarity. The disappearances were not random. They followed a cycle, tied to a forgotten tragedy buried beneath generations of silence. The reservoir was a tomb of memories, a nexus where the past seeped into the present, swallowing those who dared to unravel the town's wounds. Walter's investigation did not go unnoticed. Shadows followed him back to the surface, whispers trailed him in the streets, and eyes watched from behind curtains. But rather than intimidate him, the mounting resistance only fueled his resolve. In the hero's journey, this was the stage of trials, where the hero must face not only external dangers, but the internal battle between doubt and courage. His nights were haunted by dreams of drowning, of faces rising from the depths to plead for remembrance. Yet with each passing day, Walter grew stronger, more certain that to break the cycle, he would have to confront the source of Elmridge's sorrow, the moment when the town first slipped into shadow and silence. Armed with a key, the diary, and a fierce determination, Walter prepared to descend once more, this time not as a stranger seeking answers, but as a seeker ready to face the darkness itself. The journey ahead promised pain, revelation, and perhaps redemption. But Walter Grady had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. In the quiet that followed, Elmridge held its breath, waiting to see if the story would finally be rewritten. The day of the next trial arrived with a heavy sky that seemed to mirror the weight on Walter Grady's shoulders. The courtroom, once a place of judgment and finality, now stood as the arena for his reckoning, a place where the past shadows would be confronted and a chance for truth to break through the fog of accusation. Walter stepped into the room not as the accused, but as the bearer of revelations unearthed from the depths of Elmridge's forgotten history. His journey had transformed him from a man haunted by suspicion into one armed with knowledge, ready to claim justice not just for himself, but for the lost voices silenced by fear and silence. As the judge's gavel echoed, signaling the start of proceedings, Walter's heart beat with a mix of anticipation and resolve. Witnesses were called, townsfolk who had once turned away, now compelled to speak by the evidence Walter had gathered. Each testimony wove together a tapestry of truth, exposing the flaws and falsehoods that had condemned him. The mysterious symbols, the hidden chamber beneath the reservoir, and the diary's pages came to life in the courtroom, painting a vivid picture of the real story behind the accusations. The courtroom listened, captivated and shaken, as Walter laid bare the secrets long buried beneath Elmridge's surface. Opponents tried to undermine his findings, casting doubt on his discoveries, but Walter's steadfast determination and the weight of irrefutable proof turned the tide. The judge, once stern and unyielding, found his resolve wavering in the face of the overwhelming evidence. It was not just a trial of a man's guilt, but a reckoning for the entire town, an unmasking of the collective fears and mistakes that had clouded justice for too long. In this moment of trial, Walter became more than a defendant. He became a beacon of hope, a symbol of the power of truth to heal and redeem. His voice, steady and clear, carried the echoes of those who had been forgotten, demanding that their stories be heard and honored. The courtroom, once a place of condemnation, transformed into a sanctuary of recognition and renewal. As the verdict was finally pronounced, a hush fell over the room. Walter was exonerated, his name cleared, and the chains of suspicion shattered. But beyond the legal victory, there was a deeper triumph, the acknowledgement of the pain Elmridge had endured, the courage to face its darkest chapters, and the promise of a new beginning. Walter stepped out of the courtroom into the fading light of day, no longer a man defined by accusation but a hero forged by his journey through darkness and doubt. The town, too, seemed to breathe anew, its silence broken by whispers of hope and the first stirrings of healing. Walter Grady's quest for truth had not only reclaimed his freedom, but had opened a path for Elmridge to reclaim its soul. This was the culmination of his journey, the return from the abyss, with the elixir of justice, shining bright to illuminate the way forward. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, Walter knew that he had crossed the threshold into a new chapter, one where truth and redemption would guide him and his town toward the light. After the courtroom doors closed behind him, Walter Grady stepped out into a world that had shifted beneath his feet. The air outside was tinged with the faint scent of rain, and the streets of Elmridge seemed both familiar and foreign, as if the town itself was awakening from a long, troubled sleep. The verdict had cleared his name, but the journey was far from over. For every step forward, Walter felt the weight of what had been uncovered, the hidden scars etched into the town's history, the lives lost and forgotten, and the fragile hope now flickering in the hearts of those who had once turned away. He had emerged from the trial, not just vindicated but transformed, carrying the heavy mantle of responsibility to mend what had been broken. As he walked through the quiet streets, faces appeared at windows and doorways, some filled with tentative relief, others with cautious curiosity. The whispers of change were beginning to ripple through Elmridge, an undercurrent of possibility that had been missing for years. Walter knew the real test lay ahead, to help this fractured community heal, to bridge the divides born of fear and silence. The key he carried was no longer just a symbol of discovery, but a beacon for rebuilding trust and understanding. He reached out to those who had once doubted him, extending hands of reconciliation and opening doors to conversation. The process was slow, painful even, as wounds long ignored began to surface, but Walter's steady presence offered a promise that healing was possible. Yet, beneath the surface of this fragile renewal, shadows lingered. The mysteries of the reservoir and the cryptic symbols were only partially unraveled, hinting at deeper truths still hidden in the dark corners of Elmridge. Walter's nights were restless, haunted by dreams that pulled him back into the depths he had explored, a reminder that his quest was ongoing, that the heart of the town's sorrow had yet to be fully faced. But with each new dawn, he found renewed strength, fueled by the community's tentative steps toward recovery and the knowledge that his role was no longer just as a seeker of truth, but as a guardian of hope. In the quiet moments between day and night, Walter reflected on the path that had brought him here, the trials, the revelations, the confrontations with fear and doubt. He understood now that the hero's journey was not a tale of a single victory, but a continuous cycle of challenge and growth, loss and redemption. His story was intertwined with Elmridge's, bound by a shared destiny to confront darkness and forge a future where silence no longer held sway. Walter Grady stood at the threshold of this new chapter, aware that his journey had changed him irrevocably. The road ahead was uncertain, strewn with both promise and peril, but he faced it with a heart tempered by experience and a spirit unbroken. The hero had returned, not just with the elixir of justice, but with a vision for renewal, ready to lead a town out of shadow and into the light. And so, With the echoes of the past behind him and the promise of tomorrow ahead, Walter stepped forward, carrying the story of Elmridge and its people as a testament to the enduring power of courage, truth, and hope. Walter Grady's life after the storm of accusation and trial unfolded like the calm after a long and turbulent voyage, yet it was far from a simple return to normalcy. His journey had reshaped him fundamentally, leaving scars as well as newfound strengths that would define the man he had become. The town of Elmridge, once a place shadowed by suspicion and fear, now felt different, not because everything had magically changed overnight, but because Walter himself had changed the way he moved through it and the way others now saw him. Freed from the chains of false blame, Walter embraced a new role, one both quiet and profound, that of a healer and a keeper of stories, a living bridge between the fractured past and a hopeful future. Every morning, as the sun rose over the reservoir that had once been the center of his darkest hour, Walter would walk its edge, a silent guardian of the secrets now revealed. The water shimmered peacefully, reflecting the sky's soft light, but beneath its surface lay the memories he had brought to light, the truths he had fought so hard to uncover. Walter carried these memories with a solemn respect, knowing that healing was not just about clearing his name, but about helping Elmridge confront its wounds so they might finally begin to close. He reached out to neighbors and strangers alike, offering quiet words of understanding, listening to the stories they had kept locked away, and gently encouraging the town to face its past without fear. His home became a sanctuary for those seeking not only answers, but also connection. Walter transformed the space into a gathering place where the fractured threads of Elmridge's community could weave together anew. People came to him with tales of their own pain and hope, their voices stitching together the tapestry of a town reborn. He organized meetings, shared what he had learned, and inspired others to take part in the healing process. Slowly, walls that had separated friends and families began to crumble, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of trust. Walter understood that his role was not to erase the past, but to help the town carry it forward with honesty and compassion. Yet, Walter's personal journey was just as profound as the town's transformation. The fear and isolation that once gripped him had left their mark, but they also awakened a deeper resilience and clarity of purpose. He found solace in small routines, morning walks, journaling, tending to a modest garden, as acts of grounding, reminders that life could be both ordinary and extraordinary. Through these rituals, Walter nurtured his own spirit, allowing himself to heal even as he helped others do the same. The quiet strength he cultivated was a beacon in moments of doubt, a steady force guiding him through the lingering shadows that sometimes flickered at the edge of his consciousness. As seasons changed, so did Walter's sense of belonging. No longer an outsider or a man marked by accusation, he was becoming a vital part of Elmridge's renewed heartbeat. Children waved as he passed, elders nodded with recognition, and neighbors smiled with a warmth that once seemed impossible. Walter realized that his hero's journey had come full circle, not in some grand finale, but in the subtle, steady rebirth of a community and a self. The trials he endured had forged him into a man who understood the power of truth, the necessity of courage, and the grace found in forgiveness. Looking toward the horizon, Walter knew challenges still awaited, not just for him, but for Elmridge as a whole. But he faced them with a heart tempered by struggle and a spirit strengthened by hope. His journey had taught him that true heroism was not about the battles won or the accolades received, but about the willingness to keep moving forward, to keep seeking light in the darkest places. In this new life, Walter Grady carried the legacy of his quest like a quiet flame, illuminating a path for himself and the town he loved, a path toward healing, reconciliation, and enduring peace. Walter Grady's journey, marked by trials, revelations, and hard-won redemption, ultimately carried a message far beyond his own story, a message that echoed the timeless call of the hero's journey itself. It whispered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it, that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has the power to heal even the oldest wounds, and that forgiveness, both of oneself and others, is the bridge between suffering and peace. Walter's path reminded all who heard it that every shadow, no matter how dark, can be met with light, and that the act of facing one's past is the first step toward a future reclaimed. In the quiet aftermath of his trials, Walter understood that the greatest victory was not his own vindication but the awakening of a community once silenced by fear and mistrust. His story became a testament to resilience, a beacon for those lost in their own struggles, and an invitation to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength. The legacy he left was not merely one of justice served, but of hope rekindled, a hope that would carry Elmridge forward, binding its people with shared truths and renewed faith in each other. Walter's final message was simple yet profound, that the hero's journey is not just a tale of extraordinary feats, but a universal path open to all who dare to confront darkness, seek truth, and choose healing over despair. In this, his story lives on, not as a conclusion, but as an enduring call to courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that even in the deepest night, dawn awaits.